Welcome to the Professional Investment Podcast. I'm Charlotte Moore, award-winning journalist and co-founder of Moore Squared Communications. Each episode, we welcome a guest to the show to share their news story of the week. And I'm delighted to welcome Chris Hitchen, Chair of Border to Coast Pension Partnership, to the show this week. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Charlotte. Great to be here.
Lovely to have you on the show. Do tell us, what is your news story of the week?
Well, Charlotte, my news story of the week is UK to unveil pension reform aimed at boosting retirement savings. And this was published in the FT under the byline of Mary McDougall on the 5th of June.
Yes, I mean, I can ask you why you think this is the pension story of the week, but it's a bit of an obvious one, isn't it? When the government publishes a pensions bill, everybody in the pensions industry tends to sit up and take notice. But what was it?
Well, when you asked me for a story of the week, I thought perhaps we could talk about England's lacklustre performance against Andorra. But you're right; it wasn't really going to cut it in the week of a pensions bill.
Maybe that's for another podcast. So do tell me, is there anything in particular that stood out to you about this story about the pensions bill? And there sure was a lot stuffed into it.
Well, there are lots of different pieces to it. That's right. Bits about merging small pots in DC. Bits about surplus release in DB, but I think you talked about that with Morton quite recently. Bits about defined benefit super funds, about creating scale in DC. But hidden away in there, there was something about the government taking reserve powers to mandate investment potentially for pension schemes. And clearly what they have in mind there is that if they don't get enough traction on people investing in the UK, then they may take powers to make that happen. So I'm sitting here in Border to Coast office, one of the local government pension scheme pools. And so that made us sit up and take notice a bit, I guess.
That seemed to play equally badly with everybody in the pensions industry, I have to say. Nobody really wants mandation.
Well, I suppose there are some good things about it. If you're a trustee, then if you're worrying about your fiduciary duty and whether you can reconcile that with playing nicely with government investing in the UK, then it gets you off the hook, I suppose. So I can see that it makes sense in that respect. I suppose the concern for us would be that, we're doing a lot of this anyway, frankly. The LGPS probably invests about a quarter of its assets in the UK, and a fair amount of that is in private assets. But we only want to invest with people and alongside people who want to do it, and in projects that actually are going to generate a decent return. So I suppose there's a bit of a worry that if everyone floods into a too small supply of projects, then it will just bid up the price and destroy the potential return. So I think government needs to think about that a bit when it brings the bill through.
There is an awful lot of money in the pensions industry, and if all of that is chasing the same sort of venture capital or local growth, we could be in a situation where it no longer becomes worthwhile to invest because you're just buying it at the wrong price, which of course is at the heart of investment. But
we need a good supply of projects, don't we? That's something else we might talk about a bit. It's not unique. But I was in Canada a few months ago talking to some of their pension funds, and they were having exactly the same conversations with their government. But they were saying to government, well, where are the toll roads and the airports for us to invest in? You've got to make them available to us. And that's true in the UK as well. That's why the Canadians have been over here buying ours.
Exactly. So if we're talking about the pensions bill, and obviously with your hat on as the chair of Border to Coast Pension Partnership, what in the pensions bill was there about the LGPS, and what does it tell us about the government's consolidation agenda?
So I guess we already knew the direction of travel for the LGPS. The assets have been increasingly pooled into 8 different pools for the England and Wales authorities over the last few years. And we know that there's a direction of travel to further consolidate those down to probably 6 pools. That's going to play out over the next year, I guess. So that's all established, but there are many moving parts at the moment, and we don't quite know how it's going to end. So that wasn't something that was really new in the pensions bill. So I guess the main implication for us was this foundation point, therefore. But clearly, there are other places where consolidation is coming through the pensions bill, and in particular, the desire to create what are called DC mega funds by getting DC funds to combine together. Look, I do feel that there are benefits in scale in pensions. Big isn't always better, but it does allow you to do more things. It allows you access to more assets. It gives you more resilience in your organisation if you have more scale. So I think the government's pushing at an open door there. And frankly, the UK has probably had a more fragmented pensions market than many other countries over the years. So I think it's generally a good thing that things are being brought together. There's an old adage that every time you add a naught to your assets, you should change the way you invest them, which is sort of true. So within the local government pension scheme, I guess typical authorities are investing pots of single billions of assets, which, you know, not too shabby in many ways. But if they're bound together into pools of tens of billions, 50 billion plus, say, up to 100 billion, then they're going to have much better access to, for instance, private markets, and they're going to be much more able to find the best projects to invest in. That's the reality.
There is also.
I also have a bit. Sorry.
There's also a mindset change that happens when you become bigger, isn't there? In that, you know, you're less reliant on third-party providers. You start to be able to do things in-house, and you start to have a greater sense of control. I think you can see that as we've seen DC get bigger and bigger, the ambitions have grown in terms of the kind of assets that they want to be able to invest in, the kind of personnel that they can hire. It becomes more attractive and it professionalizes, I think. I mean, maybe my word rather than yours, but you do get a sense where it starts to be run in a different way. And that can be challenging for the asset management community because the nature of the relationship evolves and changes. But I don't think that we need to be sort of doom and gloom about it, in that no matter how big you are, you're never probably going to be able to manage to do absolutely everything in-house, are you?
I don't think we'd want to, frankly. There's an awful lot of talent out there in the asset management industry. So you're right. As a bigger organization, you have more choices. And there are some things which you can sensibly bring in-house. And there are extra services that you can offer to your customers. So one thing that we were going to do in partnership with our partner funds over the next few years really was extend the range of products we provided to them, and in particular to start helping them with their strategic asset allocation, which remains something which is in their gift. They're the fiduciary, they have to decide on that. But we could perhaps provide them with advice around that. Now that's something else that government is now saying that local government pools ought to be providing. So we're very much pushing in the right direction there. But it's something that we couldn't have done if we were much smaller. Conversely, I would say that there is a diseconomy of scale that kicks in eventually. And I've made a bit of a study of funds around the world over the years. And my observation of the really, 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 really large ones is that they actually have less freedom of action because the nature of their scale, they really have to just invest in absolutely everything that's out there. And they become very big organizations, sometimes complex, sometimes less so, but arguably they have less ability to really perform well for their members than medium-sized funds.
Yeah, I mean, you said at the beginning...
But I'm talking there about funds of 500 billion plus, you know, we're nowhere near that problem.
Got a way to go, yeah. I mean, you said at the beginning, each time you add another zero, you need a different way to invest, and that's the point. When you become so big, it becomes very, very difficult because every time you want to deploy capital, it's just so much capital that you risk, especially if you're outside of public markets, just moving the markets, don't you? And we've seen that we see that even on a small scale with individual funds and individual asset managers. And history is littered with stories of people who were star fund managers until they got too much money and they just found it harder and harder to invest well.
Yeah, and it's really hard to make that call, isn't it? I've had many asset managers over the years who set a ceiling for what they thought the size of their strategy would be. It's usually about 20% higher than where they're at, and the ceiling sort of goes up as the assets under management go up, but not always. It's a real issue for people, yeah.
Yeah. So we mentioned the LGPS, and we also mentioned that there's lots of other things in the pension bill, and said that we know, Chris, that you are a man that wears many hats. So you're not just an LGPS specialist. I thought the thing that was interesting, and there was some really interesting things about DC, you've touched on the government wanting to make schemes be at least sort of 25 billion, although I don't think there's any sort of like language in the bill to sort of mandate that or force people to it. I think the other thing that's really, really interesting is saying that schemes need to simplify retirement incomes and provide a default retirement income. I think that's a welcome move from just a sense perspective, because we saw that when DC members had to buy annuities, that they would always just buy the annuity that was part of the that was offered by their pension provider. So if we can ensure that pension providers provide high quality retirement income, it's unrealistic for us to think that we can have a paternalistic system up to retirement and then suddenly everybody's going to become a retirement expert and know how to invest their own portfolio. So I think that's a welcome move. What do you think?
I totally agree with that, Charlotte. I'm not actually involved in the DC business right now, but I was on the board at Nest for many years. I was one of the first set of board members when it was set up in 2010 and chaired the investment committee, and went back for another go 2018 to 24. So I've seen it when it was frankly so small you couldn't see it, and I saw it when it was had 13 million members and over 40 billion in assets, and it and obviously several other master trusts are still growing very, very quickly. Now, Nest published a blueprint for retirement back in 2015, which really said a lot of these sorts of things. It was auto enrollment itself, and Nest in particular was set up on the ground on the lines of, let's not give people hard decisions to take. If give them the opportunity to take them, but if they don't want to take them, default them into something that is going to work well for them. Give them high quality pensions without them really noticing. And I think that was a good principle, and I think that principle remains the case. I don't speak for Nest, but it has already taken some strides to introduce a sort of default retirement pathway for its larger pots. I'm still not talking about very large pots, but sort of 10,000 plus, I guess, which has some key ingredients that I think will be useful for other schemes going forward. So it's how do you balance giving people as much of their money as you sensibly can as they go along, so they have time to enjoy it, whilst trying to make sure they don't run out as they approach later life. And I mean, that's quite a complex problem, really. It's quite hard for pension professionals to solve, let alone the average scheme member. The really difficult bit is the end of life. Unless people know they have some sort of safety net at the end, then they'll worry about whether they can spend their money as they go along. And actually, everyone worries a lot about running out of money, and what really happens is they don't spend enough, and they die without having spent it. So some sort of end of life annuity or risk pooling is really the most essential component, it feels to me. And it may be that CDC has a role to play there in future. I know you're not a great fan of CDC, Charlotte, but that might be a place where it actually has something to say.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of interest at the moment in retirement income, and that's, we've been talking about it for at least a decade. I feel like at least a decade. So it's probably 15 years, but we've been talking about it for quite a long time. But we're now at the point where the weight of people retiring is making it worth focusing on. So there's lots of interest in the industry, isn't there, about this? And there is that investment conundrum, as you've highlighted, that about, how do you mix that mixture of drawdown with an annuity, and is that even attractive to people? Because lots of people see their pension pot as something that they want to draw an income out of, and then they want to be able to hand it over to the next generation as part of their inheritance. So there is a challenge around that. And there are lots of challenges too, aren't there, around the sort of the administrative side, and just like trying to figure out how much money somebody has, and everybody being slightly different, and how you get involved in guided outcomes, and whether you get into sort of, do we take advice, and how do we wrap all of that into the offering as well, which I don't think anybody's really answered yet, have they?
Not really, and it is very complicated, but I think we're gradually moving away from a situation where everyone feels paralyzed, that they can't do anything because they can't reach the standard required to advise anyone. I hope that's becoming more possible to do. I mean, you point to another good point, that for any individual, you don't know what arrangements they have elsewhere, and therefore finding something that works for them, it is complex. You can only do the best you can, it seems to me, but you're sort of duty bound to try. It's better than not trying, it seems to me.
Well, I agree, and that's why I think the idea that everybody has to have some kind of default thing that they can switch into to provide an income is definitely the best solution behaviourally as well. And then hopefully we can make sure that those default income solutions are up to scratch by regulating carefully, I would imagine.
Indeed. There's something in the bill as well, wasn't there, about consolidation of small pots, which... again, from a Nest perspective, I guess, so he says, not having a mandate to speak for Nest, we always realised that our members were in transitory employment and they tended to work for a Nest employer for a few months or a couple of years and then go away. But then they'd probably come back again in a year or two, just because of the nature of that employment. So I suppose we always felt we were consolidating their pots. We just waited for them to come round again. And pretty much we only had one pot for each member. Now, governments identified there are 13 million small pots of under £1,000. 13 million, coincidentally, is the same number of members that Nest kind of has, but it's not the same 13 million, I don't think.
No, but that does all strike me as, sensible things that we can do in order to ensure that people have better retirement and that their pensions are looked after better. And also, from a pension scheme's perspective, it's much easier to invest a pot that's been consolidated wisely rather than trying to invest all these small pots of £1,000.
But the really important thing, I think, is that no matter the size of the pot, the member gets access to a high quality investment proposition, that they get value for money, where value for money isn't just about cost, it's about the quality of the investment and the way it's packaged and explained to the member. Those things are all important, it seems to me.
Well, yes, you've led me neatly on to my next question, which is the other thing about DC, which is also welcome, is a focus by the government on value for money and trying to get away from this habit that we've got into in DC for using cost as a proxy for value for various different reasons, starting with the investment management charge cap, then moving into lots of pension providers using cost as a way to get hold of market share. And we really need to start moving away from that. But we also need to be really careful how we implement that, don't we? And learn from Australia and the like, and make sure that we don't sort of put in strategies that then make everybody focused on quarterly returns, for example, that we do start looking at value for money over the lifetime of a member.
It's always really hard, whatever kind of pension you're talking about, to really focus on the long term. That's been something I've always been trying to do throughout my career. It's so hard, isn't it? Because you can only measure things over a short to medium term. You don't know how things are going to turn out over 20 to 30 years, but you got to try, haven't you? So you need to have a wide range of metrics which are likely to lead to good outcomes, rather than just thinking about, as you say, what the quarterly returns look like. The Australian super fund industry has a lot of things to recommend it, but it may be misguiding itself if it's going down a route of performance comparison tables. The different thing there is that each member chooses their provider, don't they? And they can switch at will whilst contributing. Whereas in this country, it's the employer that chooses where the contributions go, generally speaking. So it's a slightly different system, but there are many things in common nevertheless.
Yeah, and I mean, if we do get to some kind of workable definition of value for money, and we manage to move the industry away from cost and towards value for money, is that what would really unlock a broader range of investment options? Because we've talked about that for a long time, and I get the feeling the industry is starting to move in this direction, mainly because the government wants it to. But do we then get a broader universe and a more sophisticated strategy and less of a over reliance on passive equity, or passive equity when it makes sense for passive equity, if you see what I mean?
I hope so. And bringing it back to the LGPS, I think that's true there as well, actually. I think what pooling has done for the LGPS is it has made it easier for our partner funds, everyone's partner funds, to find those value for money projects, which aren't just about investing in the broadest market. I mean, there has been some cost saving, and even to the extent that assets aren't in pools because they're in passive funds with commercial providers. The terms for those are better, I believe, than they were before pooling happened. So cost is definitely part of it, Charlotte. I wouldn't want to deny that, but yes, to go back to what we were saying earlier, it's about how can we find and steward those really important projects which are going to benefit the UK society, but also scheme members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, and that's what we're going to need to develop over time. We're going to need to find a way to do that, and then find the best investment strategies for members as they move from starting out there in their working life all the way up to, and now obviously through retirement, with retirement income now having to be default. So it's a very, very long journey, and obviously you're highly unlikely to have the same person throughout that whole journey, since most people are expected to have, I think it's around 11 jobs during their life.
Well, I think that's probably less true in the local government pension scheme, actually. I think there's probably a bit more tension. Although it's worth bearing in mind that even their pensions are relatively modest. I think the average pension in the LGPS is something like 5,000 a year. So there are a lot of part-time workers. They have long careers, but they don't earn large amounts of money. So we feel that the work we do to invest their money is vitally important, and it makes a big difference to their overall retirement. If you've got an extra 5,000 on top of the basic state pension, then it's transformational, frankly. And if we can invest that in things which are going to make a difference to their lives, whether it's a sustainable electricity grid, or through wind farms and solar, those sorts of things, or whether it's contributing to well-being through future drug development or whatever it might be. There are a whole host of things that need to happen in the UK which require UK capital to finance them, and we feel that our members need us to do that for the outcome as well as for the investment income it provides.
Now let's return to the LGPS again, as you mentioned it there. I mean, the unique point about the LGPS is you're obviously much more politically how can I put this, influence than maybe other forms of pension money in the UK. And we recently had the local elections, and we had the election of lots and lots of reform councillors. And we had Darren Grimes on the Today programme saying he was going to take a closer look at pension schemes and how they invest, and not really in favour of them investing sustainably. Have we any sense as yet as to what those multitude of reform victories are going to mean for either partner funds or LGPS pools, and how that might influence your investment strategy going forward?
I don't think we do, Charlotte. I think it's too early for that, frankly. I mean, I would say that we have partner funds who've always been of different political persuasions, and the partner funds here always say they're like-minded, and it's not true at all, frankly. They're not like-minded. They're just minded to work together. My experience of both local politicians and pensions officers, local government officers, is that they're really focused on finding solutions for their members, for their areas, for their local taxpayers, and whatever their political persuasion, that's kind of what they're there to do. That's what they want to do. So I am hopeful that we will find that continues to be the case going forwards. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've been fortunate enough to work with, as I said, different political parties at border to coast, but nationally, I've been appointed to different roles by secretaries of state from Labour, Liberal, and Conservative parties, and they're all at bottom. They're all trying to do the right thing. It's not always evident from media reports, but we all live in the same world, and we all have to find solutions to the same problem. So it's too early to answer your question, but I'm hopeful, Charlotte.
And so is the danger that you mentioned that partner funds say they're of one mind, but they are quite different political persuasions. But up until now, they've managed to come to, an understanding of what type of funds they want for you, the Border to Coast pool, to be able to offer them. Do you have any concern that maybe that kind of era of consensus might be over, or any concerns in that area at all, that you might just be in a much more fragmented and angrier political environment?
Much too early to tell. I mean, there are so many changes coming through local government. I mentioned already the extra pooling, and this is going to cause some reconfiguration, I guess, of the partner fund pools. But local government reorganisation is going to accelerate that. Quite a few councils are also going to find that they're merging into larger areas effectively, or come under regional mayoralty control. So I think the shape of local government will look quite different in 5 years' time, irrespective of the politics. And the politics, well, it's not my business to predict that, I guess.
Yes, of all the things to predict, politics is possibly the worst in the world. The easiest to get wrong, right?
But it's unwise to make predictions in general, especially about the future. I think it was Yogi Berra who said that. So that's my mantra.
Well, I think that's a great place for us to end this podcast. I think we've had a very good canter through the key points of the pension bill. Thank you so much for being on the show, Chris. You've been a fantastic guest.
Lovely to talk to you, Charlotte. Thanks very much.
And to all our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Professional Investment Podcast. Do make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss a future episode, and do engage with the podcast. Please answer the poll if you're listening to this on Spotify, and do comment. Thank you for listening.